Chapter 33. Waiting. The taxi engine chugged noisily while the children clambered out. The front door swung open. Even from the gate, Sade could see the worry in Aunt Gracie's face. The grey in her hair seemed to have streaked her cheeks. Uncle Roy had his arm around her. He looked solemn rather than cross. Aunt Gracie quietly insisted that the children eat before Sade was asked to explain exactly where they had been and what they had done. Femi was silent again. When Sade spoke, she fixed her gaze on Aunt Gracie's collar. It was her fault that Aunt Gracie had been so upset and that Uncle Roy had been out searching the streets for them. But as she related how Mr. 7 o'clock had given them hot chocolate and how he listened so carefully, both adults seemed to ease a little. So he really listened to your story? Aunt Gracie asked. He looks a decent enough man. Now we must wait and see. Nah? Uncle Roy was cautious. The following evening at 7 o'clock, the children joined Aunt Gracie and Uncle Roy in front of the television. The main stories always came first, then the rest of the news. Sade had made a special telephone call to Papa to make sure that he too was watching, but she avoided telling him exactly how she and Femi had got to see Mr. 7 o'clock. Papa had sounded pleased. All the detainees shared a single television. Most of them eagerly followed the news just like Papa, always hoping to hear something from their own countries. A few preferred the game shows, films, or sports, and arguments occasionally flared up, but Papa had been confident that he could persuade the others tonight. Sade tried to imagine them. Papa tried to remain calm, perhaps with his friends from Somalia and Bosnia next to him. Would they really believe that Papa's children could get his story onto television? That night, Mr. 7 o'clock and the other presenters said nothing at all about Papa, nor the evening after. Don't give up, Uncle Roy advised. They have to check everything. It must take time getting the information from Nigeria. But Sade's hopes were dipping. On the telephone, Papa was sounding quieter. No letter had come back from the Union of Journalists, and there was no further news from Mr. Nathan. She could not concentrate in any of her classes, even in English, where Mr. Morris had asked them to research and write a short piece for a news programme such as Making News. They had to work in pairs, and Mr. Morris had put her with Mariam. Their silences were awkward, especially when Donna poked her head between them. What's up then? I thought you were mates and all. Sade would have liked to slap the grin from her face, but instead Donna's words burned into her. Mariam looked miserable as well. Both Sade and Mariam told each other that they had no idea for a news programme. On Friday evening after supper, Sade said she was going to her bedroom to do her homework. Instead, she crept under her quilt, staying there until just before 7 when she forced herself downstairs. Auntie and Uncle were watching the television, but Femi had turned his back. He was slapping cards onto the carpet in a game of patience, making clicking and sucking sounds with his tongue and teeth. Sade sank into the sofa. Mr. 7 o'clock was behind his desk waiting for the fanfare of music to stop. If nothing else, she liked his tie. It was pleasantly bright, purple-orange shading into a sunset of red, pink, and purple. Papa disliked wearing ties, but even he might like this one. They hadn't spoken for a couple of days. Was he still bothering to get people to watch the news? Suddenly, Sade sat bolt upright. Papa was smiling from a large square behind Mr. 7 o'clock, a much younger Papa, but definitely their father. Femi, look! Femi swiveled around. A Nigerian journalist, Mr. Falaroni Salaja, currently being detained after attempting to enter Britain illegally, is at the centre of a growing dispute. A spokesman for the Nigerian government has said that Mr. Salaja is wanted for murder and should be returned to Nigeria. Mr. Salaja, however, is claiming political asylum. Coming so soon after the execution of the Nigerian writer, Mr. Ken Saro-Wiwi, the case is politically sensitive. Mr. Nelson Mandela, President of South Africa, has continued to urge a tougher line against Nigeria's military dictators. But here in Britain, the government has been taking a tougher line against asylum seekers, claiming that many are not genuine refugees. To discuss the situation, we have in the studio Tara Mosam, a writer and filmmaker who has recently returned from Nigeria, where she followed the case of Ken Saro-Wiwa. Tara Mosam, first of all, what do you know of Folarin Solaja? The camera swung to an earnest young woman with a bob of black hair fanning out from her cheeks. Folarin Salaja, who is well known within Nigeria as one of a small band of very courageous journalists who still dare to tell the truth about abuses of human rights by the military government. He writes for the small but important weekly paper Speak, which has been playing a dangerous cat and mouse game with the authorities. The newspaper staffs have moved their offices several times to avoid being closed down by the police, but unlike Ken Saro-Wiwa, Mr. Salaja is not well known outside Nigeria. What events actually led to him seeking asylum here? Mr. 7 o'clock leaned slightly forward like he had done across the table a few nights earlier. About 5 weeks ago, there was an attempt on his life. Unknown gunmen called at his house, fatally shooting his wife instead of him. Apparently, he'd been receiving death threats for some time, but had ignored them. However, after the assassination of his wife, he went into hiding. The Home Office say that he was arrested a couple of weeks ago trying to enter through London Airport on a false passport. They say that he did not declare on arrival that he was a political refugee and he did not ask for political asylum until his identity was challenged. So they intend to deport him. Is there anything stopping them? Mr. Salaja has appealed on the grounds that his life will be in danger if he is to return to Nigeria, and also that his children are here in England. He says they were smuggled here immediately after their mother's death. But the Home Office claims to have no record of them. Mr. 7 o'clock looked grave. Was he going to say that he actually had met them? Tell everyone watching that the Home Office was wrong? Sade felt blood flush to her face. I gather there was a warrant out for Mr. Salaja's arrest in Nigeria. Mr. 7 o'clock was straightening up. Yes, a further twist. Mr. Salaja has now been accused of murdering his wife, and Nigeria wants him extradited. Already, some Nigerians are saying that the murder charge is an attempt to throw a cloak over the real assassins. But of course, it would be extremely dangerous for Folarin Salaja if he were to be deported. As you know, there was a great deal of criticism about the trial of Ken Saro-Wiwa and his colleagues. Well, I imagine we should be hearing much more of this case. Thank you very much, Tara Mosam. After the break, we shall... Uncle Roy began to clap. Congratulations, children. My goodness, you actually did it. But he didn't say it was us, that we told him. Femi looked confused. Our English teacher says you have to stick to the main points, explained Sade. That was probably it, Aunt Gracie said gently. But now that your daddy is in the news, it won't be so easy for them to send him straight back. In the morning, Uncle Roy took Sade and Femi to the library to search through the day's newspapers. 3 of them had printed stories about Papa, one with the same photograph of Papa as a young man. On the way home, they stopped to buy their own copies. They spread the newspapers out on the dining room table to read them again. Suddenly, Sade spotted a couple of sentences near the end of one report that they'd all missed before. A spokesperson for Nigerians for Democracy announced that his organisation would mount a demonstration on Sunday for the release of Mr. Salaja. Unconfirmed reports suggest that Mr. Salaja has begun a hunger strike in protest at his detention.